morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good, good. My name is Christian Murgia. I'm the manager of public programs here at the York County History Center. And thank you for coming out to the December 2022 edition of Second Saturday at the History Center. So today we have our very own Jim McClure. Jim is a retired editor of the York Daily Record, York Sunday News, and Associated Digital Products. Is the author or co-author of 9 books on York County history, holds a master's degree in American Studies from Penn State Harrisburg, where his research focus was on the York County journalism history. Today's topic is going to be York County's growing diverse community comes from deep roots. So without further ado, Mr. Jim McClure.
Thanks, Christian. It's great to be here. This is a program that I attend myself. I really think Saturday mornings are a great time to soak in history. So it's always a pleasure to present here at any time, but Saturday mornings are great times. At least that's been my experience. As we go here, if anybody in the audience or online has questions, feel free just to raise your hand or interrupt me. That's better than just waiting till the end, although we will have time at the end. So, that informality, I think, is better. And there's stuff that'll come up that I just won't address it as we go. So we're going to talk about these things today. We'll cover the stories of Black people in history in York County back to the 1700s. We'll show really the arc from slavery to leading positions in the community. Talk about that. Talk about the Latinos, who have a more recent history. They started appearing in big numbers to have a church in about the 1950s. Likely there were migrant workers before then, but this is when they formed a church surrounding St. Mary's Catholic Church. We'll talk about how there's work to be done. Both groups have high poverty rates and low income versus white population. We'll talk about that. So we'll talk about progress or things that are happening in a good way, but we'll also talk about challenges ahead and challenges for the community as well. And then if we have time, we'll do a lightning round of other minority groups. So we're choosing the 2 largest minority groups, Blacks and Latinos today. We'll start here with the census. We talked about the 2 largest groups, and the things I'll point out here is that the Latino population has gone up 61%, as we discussed, and the Black population 15%. So those are big. There's been the big thing I want to point out here, as far as the census goes, is that in now if you're out, and 1 out of every 5 people roughly in York County will be non-white. In 2010, it was 1 out of 10. So you can see that our population is changing and enriching really with that change in terms of experience and diversity. It's a really good thing. So that's kind of the big picture view of that. And so we'll start with our Black population. The Black people have been residents of York County from its earliest years. About 1780, more than 500 were enslaved in York County. We'll unpack all these minutes. Pennsylvania began gradual abolition of slavery in 1780, and then slavery was in place in Maryland through the Civil War. We'll talk about that. We'll unpack that because that connection between Maryland and Pennsylvania is a key thing in our development. In 1790, York County was number 2 in Pennsylvania, the number of freedmen and the number of enslaved people. We may not think about York County as being, having large agricultural spreads and so on. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why, we would have so many enslaved people. York County is a geographically big people with Adams. It held 13% of all enslaved Pennsylvanians in that year. 13%. In the early 1800s, our 45-mile border with the South, 65 miles, including Adams County, because Adams County was part of York County until 1800, made this region a destination for enslaved people seeking freedom along the Underground Railroad and freedmen seeking a home. That wide border created numerous avenues for Southern ideas to travel north as well. We'll talk about that. So some people have said that York County, I've said it, kind of adapting an idea that York County is a northern county facing with a south basement, or a southern county with a northern facing. So it's kind of interesting, you know, that border is an important thing. So we'll start unpacking this now. And really, York County's, we want to, you know, we've heard of this idea that Martin Luther King said that the moral universe, the bend of is bending towards justice. I've been kind of adapting that a little bit. I'm going to ask you at the end, where do you think the arc of history for the Black community, Latino community are bending in York County? Are they bending towards equity, equality? Are they, how are we doing? So I'll ask that at the end, just to give you a heads up. And so this is from Scott Mingus has done this table in his book, The Ground Swallowed Them Up. And you can just kind of see the oops, that hit the wrong button there. You can see how the Black population stood in 1790, 837 free people and 499 slaves. Now, some of those, because we're in the Mason-Dixon line, we talked about that, would have come from the South, but probably many of the settlers brought enslaved people with them. And so that's where I say where East meets West and West meets East, not all of the enslaved people came from the South. And then where North meets South, and this is a runway, an ad involving a runway slave person where they were, you know, an owner, the newspapers were filled with these ads as, you know, as what they considered their property ran north into York County. So as a big revenue source for newspapers in the early 1800s and late 1700s. So there's an example of that, how they would get their enslaved people back. Now, you know, that was, so we're starting with enslavement, you know, and I just kind of painted that picture. And now here we are, let's just say today, in the last decade. And at one time in this last decade, you know, you can see these people of color, these Black people here, they were mostly, they're all women, I guess, in this example. You know, this shows Black women in leadership positions in the community in the 2010s, and even today. You know, so some of that in the Black community started in around 1970s. And if you go online and Google, you know, pioneering Blacks, then you'll see I've done long lists on there. I've just condensed these for the purposes of today. And then you can see I included Latinos on here too. Latinos came into elected positions around 1990. They came here in large numbers in 1950s, and by 1990s, we had our first Latino councilman, Abe Ambrose, and first Latino school board member, Vilma Garcia Jones, and so on. So that's, you can see the arc here. We started in the Black community with enslaved people. And here we are with Black people in many positions. So this is a little bit of geography here, and down the left side, I'll show the complexity of the county, why it's so difficult to figure out York County, because we're a border county and a border state in the Mid-Atlantic area, we're north and south, and we're kind of the hinge point between New England and points south. But particularly in terms of York County, this is York County before 1800. We went all the way, I have this Franklin County on here because it shows the footprint of York County. Was this area right here? That's the Susquehanna River at the Maryland line. And it was a huge county. And so that, but look at that Mason-Dixon line there. That's a 65-mile line with the south. And so you can see how we're kind of oriented to the south here. Baltimore is that close. Philadelphia is way over here. You have to cross the river and you have to go another 90 miles after that. So our orientation as the county has been north and south, not just the west. There's been exceptions to that, but that's where we really have economically and culturally connected. You can see that with our sports teams. You can see that even today, if people are going out, they're more likely to go out down to Baltimore, especially as you get to the southern part of the county. It's still evident today. So that gives a kind of a big picture view. If I'm up here in York County, where's my biggest market for agricultural implements? Or am I more likely to form family relationships north and south of Baltimore rather than all the way to Philadelphia? You know, and so and the answer is we tend to go north and south. Again, more complexity here, how kind of fragmented we have been with the first county west of Susquehanna. We were split into two in 1800. Then we were split into thirds, you know, as to where our settlers settled in York County. You had the Quakers in the north, the Scots Irish down here and up in the Tilsburg area. Then you had the Germans right in the middle of the county. And, you know, and now David Rusk, who we'll talk about several times, a contemporary urban planner, really thinks we're involved in 4 regions today. So there's complexity here. But one of the things I really want to point out in this particular graphic is, you know, we talked about this 65-mile border right here with the South. You know, how wide is the Lancaster's border with on Mexico's line? Anybody know? Roughly, was it 25 miles to 10? It'll surprise you. It's 6 miles. Lancaster County has a 6-mile border. It's like right here. And actually, when you're down here, you're only 25 miles from Delaware, which was also a slave state. You know, so York County had Maryland as a slave state, and then had the influence of Delaware over here. So if you're over here in Lancaster County, we wonder why Lancaster County might be different than York County and so on. Well, they didn't have that exposure from the South, so they were oriented towards Philadelphia. And here we are, you know, oriented north and south. We have this wide exposure to the South. Jacksonian politics, Jeffersonian politics, you know, kind of the this rugged individualism that comes with those politics. We're Democrats for most of the 1800s. And that map there, this is a 1770s map, and it also shows very interestingly that York County isn't isolated. If you look at this, York County has all these roads going in all directions, including in Center Square here, and then all over the place. So you know, York County was on the edge of the frontier, but we were a place where you could travel through when people did travel through. So ideas passed through here. They passed from north to south and east to west. Okay, this shows the breakdown, and this is 1783. David Lasko has done some really good work on this. That's an internal York County Heritage District Center puts together. And this shows basically we had 520 slaves in 1783, or enslaved people. This shows the ethnic breakdown. We'll do that more than once probably. And this shows the ethnic breakdown over here. And it's interesting, you know, that the Scots Irish had the highest number. And, you know, maybe you'd have an opinion on that as to why that might be. Stephen H. Smith, the local historian here, says that one of the theories that he's put out is that one of the things that enslaved people did in York County in the 1700s were clear land. And in York County around 1783, which included Adams County, a lot of that land clearing was taking place in Adams County. So therefore, if you looked at another map, you'd see that a lot of the enslaved people were in today's Adams County. And the homeowners out in that area were Scots Irish. But that shows a makeup. And so you might automatically notice here that the Quakers had enslaved people. I would tend to think that many of these were English, but not Quakers. The Quakers did have prohibitions against owning slaves. And so, in fact, they're very helpful in the Underground Railroad, as we'll see. So let's talk about really kind of the best thing about, you know, the 1800s. We're involving an enslaved person. This is Williamson Goodrich, who we have to talk about in any history of York County. We know about his house here on East Philadelphia Street that's open as a museum. And he was born enslaved, came up to York County, gained his freedom, and then became a successful businessman. But one of the things about this house that is so interesting is it was an Underground Railroad site, but it's also a place of pioneering photography in York County, in America. You know, because Goodrich's 3 sons were involved in photography. In fact, the Smithsonian's caught on to that. Smithsonian has purchased a number of Alvin Goodrich's sons, the Garrettites, And those will be displayed at Smithsonian in a couple of years. So this is a major success story involving an enslaved person who gained his freedom.
Yeah, you said about Letterman Goodwin, Goodwin. You said his sons, did he have sons?
No, he did have a son, but no, I might have misspoke. William C. Goodrich, son, he had 3 photographers,
Yeah.
son, Glenn Alvin and 2 others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
sorry
know
about
how that book I did.
Yeah. And then this is this is a sobering time. This involved an enslaved person who probably came up with during the Civil War. This is the only recorded lynching, as you might call it. I think it was a lynching in York County. This involved when the Civil War period. The Confederates came up, as we know, they invaded here. They brought enslaved people with them. One of them, enslaved people, is believed left the column, Confederate column, and stayed around, and he was accused of horse thievery, which was a big deal at the time to lose. It's like someone stealing a tractor today from a farmer, you know. So 6 residents located him and cornered him, and then they killed him, shot him multiple times. And there's a coroner's inquest. Fortunately, 2 people pushed for justice in his death. And 6 were arrested, but grand jury later, under Robert Fisher, dismissed charges. So they took justice into their own hands and killed the suspected horse thief. This happened in Bermudian Creek near Devon's Mills. Okay. This is kind of showing our north-south orientation here. And this is Mark Snell. He's a scholar, master's thesis, a local guy that later taught at Shepherd College. And I'll just read this because I think it's really an important picture. The railroad, today's rail trail, right, Northern Central Railroad, tied York County's economic interests to the south before the war. For this reason, many county inhabitants were reluctant to voice any opposition to slavery in the Southern way of life. But York Countyans had more in common with the South than just a penchant for Southern money. They also shared many of the same values and political ideals of their Southern neighbors. So that railroad was key in connecting us. As much as we enjoy the railroad today, it did connect us with the South for better and worse, in the 1800s. Any questions or comments? Kind of painting this picture, this north-south thing here, and we're gonna move into the Civil War now, how that connected with our Black population. Okay, this is a map in 1860. This shows the Southern population in Maryland and Northern Virginia. You can see how the darker it is, darker gray it is, means the heavier the enslaved population. So you can see up here, I'll do a zoomed in portion, but you can see that the enslaved people along the border wasn't as heavy, but the numbers will be very, very revealing. I'll show you those to you in a second. But notice how this is York County. York County is abutting, this is Hartford and Baltimore counties here, and even Frederick County. And look, how kind of the population of enslaved people is pointing this way to the Susquehanna River. So you would expect that during the Underground Railroad, you would expect that they would head this way. The heaviest population, they get north of the Mason-Dixon line. And this gives a little bit better view. This shows that even, these numbers, 9.1%, 1 out of 10 people in Hartford County in 1860 was enslaved. So here we have zero slaves in York County right here, and we have 10% of the population in Hartford County was enslaved. So we've had a relationship with people of color, enslaved and freed since the 1790s. This has been a long-term relationship, and it's something that we should relish and study and talk about. And so you can see that if you were in Maryland and you wanted to gain your freedom, now Maryland was a neutral state, or was not part of the seceding states in the Civil War. But you can see if someone wanted to leave Maryland, it was a kind of a short walk here, and then they cross the Susquehanna to Philadelphia and their freedom.
Is Pennsylvania considered a borderline state?
A border state, well, York County is a border county in a border state. Mason-Dixon line runs about 200, originally 250 miles. We had 60 of it, I showed you about 65 miles of that, 233
When
miles.
was that Mason-Dixon line? That was laid out like long before the Civil War.
Yeah, 100 years before the Civil War. Yeah, and it became kind of the dividing line between North and South. Yeah. This came from the Goodrich Center here. I'll repeat your questions as we go forward. I need to make sure I do that. Eric asked just now, Mason-Dixon line really preceded the Civil War. Yeah, it was laid out in 1763 to 67. Yeah. And this is from the Tubman Center, and it shows a line going up Underground Railroad going right up through York County. And so the Underground Railroad presented an opportunity for York Countyans really to show their abolitionist tendencies, those that did have that. And but not that many did. This was the main mindset in York County. There's a lot of reading here, and I'll just summarize this. First, York County kind of took what amounted to a kind of a neutral position on the Civil War. They were really neutral in the sense that we weren't abolitionists, we weren't pro-slavery, we're kind of in the middle. In terms of housing during the Great Depression to where it would go the furthest. So they intentionally did not, they made it difficult for those poor whites and blacks living in the red line area to own homes. This is here is something that just is very interesting. This shows kind of the path after the Civil War that the black population, including York County's black population in the South, those that came north here in the Great Migration, they were sharecroppers at first as the rule of thumb, and then they came up to York County to work in the factories. And the migration peaked in 1931. The redlining began, which made it difficult for them to gain housing. And then there were deed and association restrictions on top of that. I'll show you an example of that right here. So, even if they could get a house out in the suburbs and so on, or if they could move out of the city, out of those redline neighborhoods, they ran into deed restrictions, and some of the deed restrictions are still in place. And if you live in certain areas of York, they're not legal, but they're still in deeds. And I think there was some effort to try to be able to put a codicil in there or something in there saying, I do not agree with this part of my deed. I think there'll be an effort here. But here's an example in this particular one. This was in Bayfield, which is out where the old Kmart was along 83 in Old East York. At no time shall any of the land or any building erected thereon be occupied by any Negro or any person of Negro extraction excepting domestic servants while employed there without permanency by the owner or occupant thereof. So that kept many people in the city, but they couldn't own houses in the city. And we know, and this builds on to this point, This is from David Rusk. And this again is part of the story of our Black population, is that a lot of times we gain our wealth through houses, through the appreciation of houses, and also through the inheritance of our houses, or the sales of our houses of those that died before us. And we can see from that last slide that those in the Black community didn't have that heritage of home ownership because we're redlining and so on. So the Black population weren't getting money from inheritance. And so this kind of points to a picture from Rusk from 1970 to 2017. The white population home ownership actually went up, but the Black ownership was going up or steadier up, and then we get the 2008 housing crisis. Now it's gone down again. So this was the numbers in 2017. We know home ownership is a great source of wealth, and this has been denied people in the Black community.
Where are the numbers now?
I don't know. This
Probably not much different.
probably not much different, or maybe even worse given COVID. So that's a good question. The really good question was, what are these numbers now? And this is David Rusk. The History Center here and the Daily Record commissioned David Rusk to do a report, this third report, and some of these tables come from those reports that he did. We call it Rusk 3.0. Okay, there's some other, this is just some other ways of life in the Black community. And this was the Yorktown when it was built in 1924, 1925. And the blueprints show that there was, these were rest facilities and dressing facilities for colored and white employees. So the Yorktown was built like that. And so you might, that's not a great start, but it was a sign of the times. And it was a sign of the times, but interestingly, this is a story that really needs to be explored more. Yorktown made the Green Book. The Green Book was a book of places that Black travelers could safely stay in 1957. So in 25 years or so, the Yorktown had made that pivot. I'm trying to show throughout this presentation, there's these terrible injustices, but there's redemption. There's redemptive moments throughout our history as well. And you might expect that. We're Northern County, right? But you have all this Southern stuff as well. And the Smithsonian has borrowed this smock from a Black worker at the Yorktown. And, it's part of their traveling exhibit, I believe. So, we have actually the Yorktown being held out nationally because of this Green Book presence. Now we're to the rise. We'll just spend a second on this. This was really an important time for us. It was really a disruptor. Disruptors are painful. They're really painful. But there's redemption in disruption. That you can go out the other side of something that's been disruptive and be better for it. And really, that's what Bobby Simpson's saying here from Chris Sachs. He's said this: if the riots hadn't taken place, nothing would have changed. And so what did change was after the riots came about, and I have this equation here. This is a kind of a quick way to talk about it. And if you all have questions, you want to talk further about the riots, we can. But the riots came about because of a long years of racial oppression, neglect of services for low-income people, an unfit mayor as head of the police, that was Mayor Snyder, and then a boiling U.S. Urban racial environment. But then it was catalyzed by the canine courts, which is with the German shepherds, which were sick disproportionately on people of color, and that caused an uprising or an eruption in 68, 69. That were what we call the race riots. They were brought to justice. The assailants and the death of both deaths in 1969 riots were brought to justice in about 2002. So it took 30 years to get that justice. That these two people killed in 1969 did not get their day in courts, so to speak, until 2002. We can talk about all of that, but here's the redemptive part about this. There was a major gathering called the Charrette in 1970, where the community came together, Black community, white community, And out of that came Rapid Transit, Affordable Housing Associates, which is a public housing agency, and Family First Health. So there's some reforms that came out of that, other things as well. Okay, this is I submit this is a point of a second lynching that took place in York County, and this happened at the intersection. This is involved in the death of Louisville Allen, and at this intersection here were sawhorses, and the police were manning those sawhorses. And so they let Louisville Allen's car go through. If you know the facts, Louisville Allen was a visitor to York County from the south. And up in this area here were gangs who were armed. And the police officers here knew that. And they let her through that intersection there, head up the hill, and she was killed at these tracks right on Newberry Street. You know, Tom Kelly prosecuted the case that just didn't have enough to go after those who allowed the, but he, you know, to allow them to go through those sawhorses. But I think that was an intentional act there to that led to her death. Here's a point of redemption. In 1965, there was a merger between Faith Presbyterian Church and First Presbyterian. Faith Presbyterian was Montoon's church, historically black church, and here's that church right here on Duke Street, kind of across from the Moravian Church on North Duke Street. And so they merged, and for all, it looked like a successful merger in many ways. In recent years, there's been some good research to show that maybe the black population, the black members of the church weren't included on the session, weren't included in decision making. And one of the sad things about it was they tore down this church, and this was called Community House. This was a recreational facility for blacks that preceded Christmas Attics. Christmas Attics was kind of a non-sectarian version of the community house. Today, it's a parking lot. You know, it's a parking lot for these upscale apartments in the back there. If you want to locate this, there's a mural on the side here called it's the Holtzapfel mural where of the doctor who helped promote the use of oxygen in treatment of pneumonia.
What street is that on?
North Duke Street, kind of across from the Moravian Church. The question is, what street is that? That's on.
What's up? You mean up here by Market?
It's at the other end of Duke Street from Market Street. It's near Philadelphia Street.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Where United Furniture or something used to be.
No, there was a, they
No,
tore
I
down
saw
a
it.
building, it's been a parking, this is East Philadelphia. So this is, here's some of the challenges here. You know, we talked about moments, you know, we're kind of ascending from slavery, and we're passing through the year. We saw some difficult moments, we saw some redemptive moments. Here are some challenges today. And, you know, and you can see right here, this is from Rusk again, Rusk 3.0, and this traces poverty levels. You know, you can see that white families, poverty has actually gone up, the poverty rate has actually gone up a little bit over the years, irrespective of, you know, all the great economies we've had. But look where the black family rate has gone down some, but look, it's still more than three times out of the white rate. Of whites. The Hispanic rate is, you know, 5 times out of the rate for whites. The combination of all this is that York County poverty rate, at least in 2017, has going up, which is surely not healthy, which is surely not good, which means it's, for all kinds of reasons, this is an overall community problem. And this also shows, this comes from York counts. And this shows income levels, and the white income levels are here. And this shows the Latino and the black income levels down here. So you see there's not equity there, but these numbers are 2016, I believe. They need to be updated, but it gives you a feel. So you can see great moments, tough moments, a lot of work ahead. Questions or comments? Any thoughts on this? Because we're going to turn to the Latinos now. Okay, this is just a couple of slides of really great moments. A couple of years ago, Carl Scott, longtime pastor on Pine Street, was made a bishop in this denomination. Pretty big deal to have a bishop in the community, and so that was a great moment. And then Loretta Claiborne voted one of the top 10 women in Pennsylvania in the last century. Loretta Claiborne, a special Olympian from New York County. He was a national figure in New York County. This kind of bridges the two populations here, the Latinos and then the Blacks. And this shows, I told you about the kind of how the sparking of the riots because of the disproportionate use of police dogs in 1969. And this is the Mayor Snyder right here, at the helm of one of those police dogs. And anybody know what this building was? That was his insurance office. That Mayor Snyder, that was his business. That he was mayor of New York in the 1940s, then he had a decade off, and then he came back in the 1960s, and not really suited for the position. But that was his insurance office there, and it became headquarters of Latinos in the community for years. So you can kind of see that kind of irony there, that twist that the Latinos are seeking equity, equality, and so forth in the Latino community. This is on Princess Street. You can see the connection there. Now we're at the Latinos, and we talked about the 1950s, and from the St. Mary's history, it's Catholic Church here in town. It was the German Catholic Church, and now it's they have a large Latino membership. In their history, 1950 saw the influx of Spanish-speaking people into York County to such an extent that Bishop George Leach appointed a pastor to minister to. So there you have a critical mass, that they would have to get a minister. And they eventually built this church here. It's on South Street. They didn't know, I'll walk that back. The Greek Orthodox built this church, and then they moved out to Lear Heights. And then this church became available about 1980, and the Latinos moved into this church. This is back behind small AME Zion Church, off of Queen Street. Today, it's a Latino church again, so it remains a Latino church. And this is Jose Santiago, who we'll see a little bit later. And this is just a great little mini history. I'm the grandson of Paulita Rios, who was the founder of San Cristo Salvador Church on the 200 block of South Street in New York City. That church had one of the first soup kitchens in New York, which fed many people in the community daily, including weekends. So here we are, just kind of the start of the Latino community. And these are some of the pioneers. And this comes from the Journal of New York County History that the History Center puts out. And this shows that, we talked earlier, just talked about how in the 1950s there were Latinos here growing in numbers. Here were two early leaders, two families, Edwin and Delma Rivera and Jose and Gloria Hernandez. And so there are pictures there to the left. This was the first Spanish American Center that came about in 1976. So it took 20 years to get that Spanish American Center into place. And we'll talk more about both of those pioneering families in a second. And so here's about 1990, and here we have our first elected Latinos. So critical mass in the 50s, leadership by the 1990s. And we have Abe Amoros, who is now with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, Chief Operating Officer up there. He was the first city councilman in 1991, and Gilman Garcia Jones served on the school board in 1989. We've had many other Latinos since, but this is kind of the start of the Latino leadership in town. This is what I call step 3. This is that point where we can actually name a block after a Latino, where we can say this block of East Princess Street, which is where Snyder's old insurance office was. There's a playground there. This particular block is in memory of Edwin and Delma Rivera. That's Delma Rivera, and there to the right, and her brother. I think her brother's name is Edwin. Well, I drew a blank here. That's right. Then Delma just recently was named Mrs. Pennsylvania. So you can see Latino community emerging and becoming Pennsylvania regional figures and so on, having blocks named after them. And here's step number 4, kind of the next generation. Zeta Morales was just received the 2002 Dory Leader Award. She's 39, 40. And she, and so you can see those that have won that award since it was put into place. It recognizes community involvement in community and fight for equity in the community. And those out on board are either people of color or Latinos. First Latino, down the Rivera, you can see there. And then this generation, 40-year-old Zeta Morales, who's done a lot in the Heart Association. She's also done in human trafficking. She's very involved in that area as well. This is, I just thought this was interesting. See, this is just reading kind of the landscape and seeing these advancements and things that are happening. And this is number one. This is the York City Police Department has these meetings and monthly meetings. And here, this one was in Spanish. That's really kind of revealing there. And then he's showing the chief here is showing 4 generations of Latinos. So, you know, the way he's phrasing it, this is on Facebook. Gio McBride, Alex Nova, Andy Baez is a detective, and then Eddie Hernandez, we already talked about the Hernandez family. He's the son of that family. So you can see we have 4 generations from the Latino community all in one frame that are members of the police department. So you can see that's trying to show the growth of the Latino community and as they move into the community and doing really important work. This is one of the things that you know that you'll recognize in the Latino community is the Three Kings Day, the Epiphany, the 12th day after Christmas, is a big in that culture. It's a big deal. It's a time of gift giving, and you can see the 3 kings. And this is Jose Santiago here. And then his wife here, it runs a housing agency, Affordable Housing Associates, that we've already talked about, that grew out of the charrette. And she was a member of public housing, part of public housing when she was growing up and also as an adult. And she wrote, as a kid, I was just wondering when I could eat again. As an adult, the stress is about when you can feed your kids. She said, I didn't want them to go through what I went through. Today, she heads a public housing agency. Just a wonderful story, wonderful thing. You know, we do have Latinos who, you know, who are Protestants as well. And I put this slide in because it shows a church, former Methodist church right behind here. And this was the United Brethren Church. They were going to tear it down, basically condemned it, and the Latino population came in, and they remodeled it, restored it, and there it is today. You know, they worship there all the time. You can tell that it's an active church. Now this is really kind of, I'm going to rush through this, but this is just a Facebook exchange, and I think this is important to show. I'm an American Studies guy, and I like to look at stuff and try to make sense of it that's happening in our culture. And someone posted on Facebook, just curious if anyone knows if more people are moving into York County than out. Not just the city. I know most people are moving out of the city. But is York County population growing or declining and so on? So I just went and replied, this shows city census population up 2.5%. You know, so the city is growing. And her response was, interesting demographic changes, though. What do you think she's saying there? She's saying those are interesting demographic changes. They're on probably, the way I'm saying that, they're not quite as good as what was there.
Can they widen the window? I wonder what they can read on that computer window. Or is that a graphic?
It's a graphic. Yeah, it's graphic. So I'll next time I present on this, then I'll make sure that I'll do that. But think about this. This is just really, if nothing else today, think about this in terms of Latinos. David Rusk wrote, as will be examined in the final section, the city's population loss would have been catastrophic had it not been a 30-fold increase in Hispanics over the half century from 1970. 455, 13,098. So think about that, 13,000 here. Let me see if I can do this on the spot here. You know, York's population was 44,000 here. If there were no Hispanics in town, York would be about a 30,000 community, 30,000 population community. If it was half that number, we would still be 35,000, 37,000 as a community. Our housing stock is built for a community of 60,000, because that's where we peaked out at in 1950 was 60,000. So we'd be half empty. You could look at it that way. It'd be a different community, wouldn't it? Whenever you have that many houses vacant. And so I really challenge this and don't really don't think that is the right type of thinking here. Whenever you can see that what the Latinos are contributing to this community. This, I'll do this quickly. In suburbia, the Blacks and Latinos, not just a city growth thing, that the Blacks and Latinos from 2010 to 2017, they went up 9.5% population. Latino growth from 1980 in the suburbs was about 2,000%. You know, so there's growth in the suburbs as well. This is just a wonderful example here. Back in 1939, the Klan came to town at North York. They met in the auditorium at North York. It's now demolished. North York Playground. And so there was in some of those, they would draw 5,000 people to their rallies in North York. They met in 1929, they had 5,000, smaller rally in 1939. And you just look at that area today within a stone's throw of where they had their rally, which is the old North York High School. And you know, right near there, near St. Peter's Church, is now demolished. It was where the Riveras lived when they first came to town. Dr. Rivera came to town. You know, that's now a parking lot there. But you know, they had Latinos moving right near where we had this rally years later. And then we have a Vietnamese Alliance Church here. We have enough Vietnamese in the community, they would have their church, which is in an old temple building, a temple design building, a Chonan design building. Noted architects, they're meeting, this is the former St. Peter's Church. They now, of course, have the new churches now, or newer churches down the road. And then we have a big effort going to restore Lebanon Cemetery, historically Black cemetery. And then there's a big effort to try to restore, and it's in both these cases, it's happening. The Pottersfield, York City Cemetery. So, you know, you can see the diversity growth that, you know, here you had 5,000 people who were claiming white supremacy. And then 39, 50 years later, 60 years, 70 years later, you have all this stuff going on involving diverse population. I think there's an interesting irony there. But what do you think? Kind of an interesting thing. In Central York School District is now about 30% Black, Latino, and other minorities. You know, so you can see how the community has changed just in this one image, how the community has changed. This is another one of those markers, and this is well established, but I'll do it anyway. Anybody know the story of this building? It's across from the Yorktown. For years, it was a Lafayette Club. Originally, during the Civil War, it's P.A. Small's residence. He was a Republican, pro-Lincoln. And then over the course of time, they sold, the family sold that to what became the Lafayette Club. The Lafayette Club was an exclusive men's club. In 1992, women were admitted. In 1998, the first Black was admitted to this club. And then we have, you know, the York College Community, you know, Center for Community Engagement moved in. And the first couple things that they did visibly was they had Black artists in there, presenting their artwork.
Well, that was the Lafayette Club. Did they just move out or did they shut down altogether?
Lafayette Club just dismantled. They closed down. Didn't have enough members to support this building. And
So
they really, you could argue they started on the diversity, start trying to deal with diversity, diversify their membership too late. there's also changes in reimbursements and so on. And I would also, for the federal government, so you didn't do the business loan just like you once did. But another thing I think is you had Paneras and so forth starting up, so you could have your business meetings at places other than exclusive men's club. So all that worked to take away their market, their members. And now it's an outreach, right? It's a place for inclusivity. And this woman here, that young lady here, is a member of the Wilson family. She was in there one time seeing the artwork that was in there. This is Philip Chambliss' rendition of her great grandfather. She was in there, saw this rendition, and made that connection. She said, "Hey, that's my kinsman." And so that's a way that York is changing. On top of, you have an formerly inclusive club. Now it's opening up, and now people of color are being able to identify their history there. It's a wonderful story. So here's some of the things we're winding up here, and just a couple things here. This is some of the projects involving Black history, Latino history, sometimes a combination of those. And, I list them up there. Lebanon Cemetery, we talked about that. City Cemetery, Allen Shad Memorial, which is at Parker Park. This gentleman, Bob Mann, is kind of taking that on. And those things that are in Black are what I would call do-it-yourself urbanism. They're really efforts that are outside of government, in cooperation with government, but places where individuals just said, "There's a need here. I'm going to head this initiative myself." And so you can see that, and you can see all the various things that are used to support and teach and instruct in York County Black history, Latino history. So from that point of view, we're on a nice arc. So any discussion on this? The arc of history is bending towards what? In Black history, Latino history in York County. What do you think? Any comments based on what you've seen so far? Any questions or anything that this is kind of breaking loose, or you've always wondered about this that maybe we didn't even cover here?
Jim,
Yeah,
we have 2 questions on Zoom,
yeah.
both from Beth. We cut out a little bit, but we got back. Wants to know if any references to the Great Migration and the impact on York with that.
Yeah, just the things I've gone over here are all found online. And one of the things I'll pitch at the end is several of the stories about the Great Migration are on witnessingyork.com. But just Google Great Migration in York County, and you'll get a lot of references on that. So that would be there's plenty of stuff out there. Just do some Googling, look at witnessingyork.com.
Okay, and then the second question, the intersection of Black and Latino communities as well. Where are our Latino communities coming from? Are there any parts of the Spanish community that also identify as part of the Black community, i.e. people coming from the Dominican Republic or the Caribbean?
Right, most of our Latino population are Puerto Ricans, and but there are obviously and that they play the intersection between. We saw in one of the earlier graphics that there are some that are a combination of races, and so there would probably are some Latinos that would identify as Black, and maybe vice versa, at least in terms of the census. I think there's interesting intersections coming here in terms of history. I mentioned, I kind of went over these quickly, but the Christmas Addicts Cultural Center that's going up, that's a museum, a community center is going up. They're fundraising for it now, but it will go a bit, likely in the next 5 years, we'll have a Latino component to it. And then the York County Heritage Trust Gene Plant Museum, which is this organization here, will talk about county history in an inclusive way. So it'll talk about Latino history, it'll talk about Black history, it'll talk about all colors in its exhibit. So there's a historical intersection as well. In many ways, this session here today is kind of that, where you're having History Center sponsoring this presentation on Black and Latino history.
She says thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna go, we have like 1 minute left, and I think I can do this in 2, if I'm not keeping it. This is, these are some of the other immigrant groups that come in. I have it here just because I think these are important, and these are kind of identifiers of that. And Italians were here. One way we talk about the Italians were through the Tossia family that owned the Valencia, what's now the Valencia Ballroom. They had a food locker there, a refrigerated locker, and so whenever they built this ballroom here, it was air conditioned, or at least cooled in some way, because they had to cool their food business as well. And over here are the Greeks. This family, the Casamas family, which is one of the first families, one of the respected families that came from the Greek community, came around the turn of the 1900s. The first, and they got into the restaurant business, as many Greeks have done over the years. There was enough of a Greek community that they had a church by the 1920s, about 100 years ago. And we already talked about the church on South Street. Now they're out, in Leader Heights. There's also another Orthodox. It's not, I don't think it's Greek Orthodox, but another Orthodox church out in Placerville area. So again, it shows that another ethnic group as they came here. We talked about Asians. We saw the Vietnamese earlier, and here's a couple that own an Asian couple that own a community garden, operate a community garden. Again, an example of do-it-yourself urbanism. They have this lot here, a vacant lot at I guess that's Penn College, and there they are, in the garden. So we have a large number of Asians here in New York County. This again is a little bit more. This shows the Dickworth drawing of that St. Peter's Church back in the 1890s. It shows the church, and it shows the Vietnamese worshiping there, and they still worship there. This is just an interesting point down in Delta, where you have across the street from each other. You have this. This was a Welsh church. I think it's a Presbyterian church now, or a community church, but it was Welsh, had a Welsh connection. In fact, they still have Welsh hymn sings in here. And across the street is a Black Methodist church, BME Zion Church, right across the street in the little town of Delta. It's great, very interesting. The Welsh came around in the 1850s to work with the slave quarries down in that area. And the slave quarries went out in about 1917, but World War I, but there's still celebration of the Welsh culture down there. This is the Haitians. We talked a little bit earlier about the Haitians community, and Haitians are in the old lunch car on Roosevelt Avenue. And if you've ever driven by there, you can see it's been rehabbed. And this is an interesting kind of all-inclusive scene of what has happened. Here you have, this is in Leader Heights, and you have a traditional Methodist church right here, a German Methodist church. There are cemeteries down here. This is on Pine Grove Road. And then on their lawn, their church, there's a Haitian fellowship that's meeting in their church. Or at least, if not that, they at least have their sign on their lawn. I tried calling one time, couldn't get an answer to that, those numbers here. But anyway, so you have German, you have Haitian, and then you have the Orthodox Church that we've talked about a couple of times already. Is back behind that. That's the marquee there. So you have Greeks out in that area, which is more than Greeks, but they have an Orthodox fellowship out there. And then, as someone told me, don't forget the biker church.
Yeah.
That's in the old Temple Baptist building, and I don't know what the ethnic makeup of that church would be. So, but don't you see how we went from German and we went to Orthodox and we went to Haitians, all in just right here in this one little part of your county. And you can look at Pleasureville is the same way. You have Orthodox, you have a number of different expressions, faith expressions, all in one area. So, here I'm putting up witnessing York, and I developed, Jamie Morpel and I, who we both administrate the group, we developed a list of Black and Latino sources and references. If you want to know more, just go to Witness New York and you'll see it, there's the file will be on there, or search for it. And you'll see that on there that we talk about. If you want to know more about Latino history, there's videos on there. We try to bring it together all in one place in one file. So you have to go looking a number of different places. And yes, there'll probably be great migration stuff on there as well. So any other questions or comments? Yes.
With the upsurge in the United States in terms of white supremacy and Christian nationalism, do you see any rumblings of that happening within York County?
Yeah, that's there's a lot to, the question was, do you see white nationalism here? I think it depends on how you want, or maybe worse than that, racism, Nazism, other farther right things. I would just say what I think has happened over the course of years, and 2 York College professors wrote about this. And it's actually in the New York Sunday News on Sunday. I write about the political nature of York County. And for years, we tended to like non-extreme candidates. If there's a candidate that was extreme for the presidency, we would vote against that candidate. So in 1964, Barry Goldwater ran, and we voted as a community, we voted against him. He's very conservative. You think, well, York County is so conservative, we would back him, but we didn't. We don't like extreme candidates. And so that's been kind of our patterns. As some people have said, we vote Republican, but we don't necessarily like extreme far right. And so you can even see that it's probably even stronger that way, because our demographics have changed. 1 out of 5 people would be non-white. But I think in fairness to that theory that the professors put up, and I've expressed for years, there is some rightward movement, especially at the congressional level and the state legislative level, where the candidates who have been elected recently are further to the right than a couple of the mainstream Republicans that traditionally have had those seats. Our mainstream Republicans historically have been a socially moderate, economically conservative, kind of mainstream Republicans, and a couple of them were displaced by those further to the right. So it's not a trend. You got to really look at history over time to know what's going to happen there. York County, and this is a long answer, but I think this is important. York County, whenever we've had these hiccups, let's say whenever the golfers out at the golf course in Shiloh area were really, the police, almost called the police on them for golfing too slowly. There was that's an extreme case, but the community came out against that. And many of the leading organizations in town just cried, took out ads in the newspaper, said, this is not right. You don't treat people like that. And so I think that whenever we had these extreme cases, and we've had some, then there's a correction there. We realize, hey, we're in the north, or that's not right. That's a southern thing, or whatever. It's just not right. And so we correct that. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. You can even say that about the Central Book Ban that made the headlines, where that didn't go through because there was an uprise. And so I think we're seeing that's York County over the years. That's not just recent. That we've seen that stuff, and there's been a correction. So that's a long answer, but I cover some of that in the column on Sunday.
What was wrong with all these books they banned?
I don't really know the details of that.
Is there anything more worth talking about, or people making Mount Everest of something this big?
I don't really know all I know is that it became an issue. I don't know the details of it, and it became an issue, but then there's a correction. Whether they were correcting an issue or non-issue, it became an issue. And I think it probably was some smoke where there was fire. And I don't know that it was ever enacted, but maybe it was planned. But I'll just say that there was a correction to that. But I think that's very York County. We saw a quote a little bit earlier. I didn't pause on it, where Charlie Backus says York County is not too hot, not too cold. We're not too blue, we're not too gray. We're just kind of York County, true and true. where with that border situation that we're in, you know, sometimes it means we don't have a strong identity. But it also, because we have so many ideas that we're dealing with. But that is, I think, often the case in any border county. You know, where you're kind of between things, between ideas. So you have a problem, you know, really gaining a consensus, you know, about right and wrong. And so sometimes we slipped and then we come back and do the right thing after that.
Well, I know the way things these days are, everything is brought to racial one way or the other.
Yeah,
I know whatever I work at, we have that.
yeah. You know, the comment was everything seems racial. I would just say that in York County, it's something we have to deal with in all kinds of ways. But you can see how historic it is because our history has connected us with those ideas. We're not in Indiana or north or far north of the Mason-Dixon line. We're on the Mason-Dixon line. Not only are we on the Mason-Dixon line, we had a big share of it and still have 45 miles of it. Yeah. Yes.
Speaking of the Mason-Dixon line, a little bit farther back, I always wondered growing up, because I live right near the town of New Freedom,
Yes.
which is of course one of the first ones right over the border. So I always wondered if that town was like named significantly because of like with freedom or anything with just crossing the Mason-Dixon line. So I've always been curious. I don't know if there is any info about that out
The
there.
question was kind of how the New Freedom get its name. And really, there's two ways of answering that. One is it was named after the Free family, which was a very, prominent family down there. So New Freedom came from the Free family. But on the other hand, New Freedom was the first stop on the Northern Central Railroad north of the Mason-Dixon line. So if you were coming from in the Great Migration, coming from the Deep South, this was your first stop in the north. And so you would have thought, well, here's my opportunity. I now have opportunity. I don't have to sharecrop anymore. I can work in a factory. I can have my house as long as I don't redline me and so on. So, you know, but so there is a way of seeing that as they just stopped there. The steam engines would stop and take on water. So it was an actual stop. And when they came, when people from the Great Migration came forward. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Other questions or comments? Really good questions. Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
How much did I miss at the beginning? Oh.
Thanks again, Jim. Thank you.